Good morning, it's August 8th. This is to my liberal friends. What is really going through the mind of Donald Trump? Is he living in some fantasy world or does he actually believe what he's saying? Now, these are important questions because it may be the determining factor in some of his legal woes. The case that Jack Smith is bringing against Donald Trump is based on a single issue. Was he lying when he said the election was stolen from him? This is not about whether he was actually right or wrong, and I believe he was wrong, but about what he believed when he made those statements and when he took steps to try and convince people that he had lost the election through fraudulent actions. He has convinced millions of his followers that something was amiss in the vote count, and they're backing him in his claims. What I can say with some confidence is there were certain irregularities in the election. Using Pennsylvania as an example, in October of 2019, the Pennsylvania legislature overwhelmingly passed Act 77, which enacted numerous changes to Pennsylvania's election code. Voters were allowed to request a mail-in ballot without providing a reason, something they could not do prior to that. A person could register to vote up to 15 days before an election and vote in that election instead of the previous 30-day period. And it said that mail-in ballots and absentee ballots would be valid if received by 8 p.m. on Election Day. The law eliminated the option of pushing one button to vote for all candidates of the same party, called straight ticket voting. Instead, a voter would need to select each candidate in order to vote the same way. Now, these changes were made due to the pandemic, and voters were being urged to use mail-in ballots to cast their votes. Democrats used these changes effectively and were able to deliver a win for Joe Biden by 80,000 votes. Now, fast forward to the midterm elections, and Republicans challenged some portions of the law. As I said, Act 77 was passed overwhelmingly, and it was a compromise between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans were seeking to end straight ticket voting, which had allowed voters to select one political party's slate of candidates, and Democrats wanted to open voting by mail to everyone. But Republicans changed their views on the law after Trump lost the state, with many of them embracing the former president's false claims that widespread fraud tied to mail-in ballots was behind his defeat. Well, a five-judge panel agreed with Republicans who had challenged the law, Act 77, saying the state's constitution required people to vote in person unless they had a specific excuse, such as a disability or being away from home on Election Day. Not surprisingly, 3 Republican judges ruled the act was unconstitutional, and 2 Democratic judges dissented. This led to Trump saying again that he was defrauding Pennsylvania, even though they complied with the law in effect at the time. Where Trump should have been focused during the 2020 election was to urge his supporters to mail in their ballots. A mail-in ballot is a sure vote, but by waiting until Election Day, all kinds of things could happen that would prevent someone from getting to the polls to cast their ballot. I want to say at this time I support in-person voting, but mail-in ballots are not going away, so Republicans better get on board and start urging their voters to mail them in. What Donald Trump was basing his claim on was some last-minute decisions by the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. The court made 5 major changes to Pennsylvania law at the last minute. Most importantly, they extended the quote received by deadline by 3 days past Election Day for mail-in ballots postmarked by 8 p.m. on Election Day, and included a presumption of timely mailing for ballots without a legible postmark or proof of service. And this enraged Trump and his supporters, and they probably had some reason. I mention these changes because it goes directly to the state of mind of Donald Trump and is crucial in the case being brought by Jack Smith. Smith and his team of prosecutors will have to prove that Trump knew he was lying when he made his inflammatory statements. And I'm not sure how you do that. I think that Trump could not accept that he lost the election because that would not comport with the perception he has built his entire political persona on that he was a winner. His egotistical stripe would not let him admit that he had lost. So in his mind, he truly believed that the election had been stolen from him. Should we charge Democratic politicians who made inflammatory statements about the Russian collusion case, specifically the Steele dossier? We now know it was false, made up by a former British intelligence officer working at a think tank in Washington, D.C. And I would suggest that a lot of Democrats might be facing a court fight if the same standard being used on Donald Trump was applied to them. Even after the Mueller report was released, a poll showed that 84% of Democrats still believe the collusion hoax, which had been peddled by Adam Schiff and the liberal media. My point today is that politicians lie all the time. Most of the time they know what they're lying when they talk, but they say things anyway. All of this is covered under the First Amendment. In a famous quote attributed to French philosopher Voltaire, he said, quote, "I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it," end quote. And that's the underlying principle of free speech. And that is what will make Jack Smith's case so very hard to prove. He may get a conviction in Washington, D.C., but eventually the case will move to the Supreme Court, and we already know their opinion of politicians lying as determined in the Alvarez case. I personally think Donald Trump has acted poorly and like a spoiled child, but that does not make him guilty of the crimes he's being accused of committing. It's been To My Liberal Friends. Thanks for listening. If you enjoy the podcast, hit the subscribe button or recommend it to your friends. Thank you.